So the purpose of today is for us to briefly share the process and outcomes of the Rural Food Bank study and an overview of the report, which was kind of the end product of that work that was accomplished by 4 rural food banks coming together to undertake this work together. And that includes the Golden, and maybe just wave as I say your name, although you will introduce yourself. So the Golden Food Bank, Invermere Food Bank, Revelstoke Food Bank, and Sicamous. So yeah, they'll each introduce themselves and their organizations in a moment. So today's an opportunity for them to share this resource for others to learn about and potentially replicate. But most importantly, it's an opportunity for the food banks to share their experience and perspectives and stories about what brought them together to undertake this work and what's come out of it. We'll also jump into conversation, discussion as a group, and hopefully hear from others about what your different or similar experiences are to these rural food banks. And lastly, we hope to share a discussion about the challenges and the shifts in food banking as a way to continue to build our knowledge and see how folks are innovating and adapting their operations and approaches during this time of increased food bank need. So before we jump into a brief presentation about the report or the study that was created, I'd love to have each of the participating food banks just introduce yourself, your role, your organization, and we've got 4 of them here today who are going to represent each food bank. And Janet, yeah, we'll start with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Janet McLean-Sempt. I'm Executive Director of Eagle Valley Community Support Society in Sicamous. We operate about 11 programs. Food security is just one of them, but it has always been my passion. And so all of the development work around our food security programs has sort of been done off the side of my desk for several years. But this was something that the further development for us was being compromised all the time by access to food and cost of food and things. And so that is how it was that we got involved. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Julia.
Morning, everyone. My name is Julia Newbury. I'm the Executive Director at the Golden Food Bank Society. Like Janet, we got involved or sort of part of the initiation of this just due to the extreme challenges that our food banks were facing, particularly in a rural context with serving people and getting enough food to serve them. And I'll just mention that we are located on the unceded territory of the Ktunaxa and Secwepemc peoples and the chosen home of the Métis Nation Columbia River Society.
Thank you. Katrina, do you want to go?
Hi, everybody. I'm Katrina Chapman. I'm in Invermere, British Columbia with the Columbia Valley Food Bank. I'm the executive director here. And I wasn't here in this role when we got involved, but it's quite obvious that it's directly related to rural shipping routes that is the cause and the need to collaborate. So it can cost up to 40% more just to get food to Invermere versus anything off the major highways. So it's a great partnership, and we've learned a lot from this experience.
Thank you. Anna.
Sorry, went to say, sorry, we are also on the unceded shared territory of the Ktunaxa and the Secwepemc people. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. Hi, I'm Hannah Whitney. I'm the manager at the Revelstoke Food Bank, which is a part of Community Connections Revelstoke Society. We're in the outreach department, and I work closely with our neighborhood kitchen as well, which is like a social enterprise rental kitchen that also makes food for our food bank here. And yeah, we're between Sicamous and Golden, and yeah, just being on the Trans-Canada Highway and then not being able to receive shipping from certain producers was definitely one of the reasons why we started being involved in investigating here.
Thanks, all. And we'll hear more of the details about how this project got started in a moment. But I'm going to pass over to Sammy, and she's going to take us from here.
Yeah, thanks, Liz, and thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Sammy Blair. I am the Food Security Manager with the Land to Table Network Society, also part of the research team, and really excited to be here today. Because the focus of today is to hear directly from the food service organizations in this Zoom room, we are going to very briefly review the report findings just as a refresher. We do have the whole data collection and analysis team here. So if you have specific questions about sort of the nitty-gritties of the study and how we collected the data, what our methods were, what the technical approach was, jot those down or pop them in the chat and we can get to them either at the end or follow up with those details later. We have a whole technical report we can share if folks are interested, but we really want to focus today on the experiences of the food banks. So if you have not had a chance to read the study, I'm going to pop that link here in the chat. And I'm going to give you an overview so you feel a little bit more oriented in sort of the main recommendations and findings, but we encourage you to dig into this report a little bit more later, especially with the context you'll have after today. We also ask that if you have any questions that come out of this first presentation section of the session, just to hold on to them because the 4 food banks are going to speak with each other in a fishbowl style, and they'll probably answer a lot of your questions, and then we'll have even more time at the end for you to directly ask questions to the team involved. So just hold on to those, or if you want to put them in the chat, we'll be keeping track of all the questions for today. All right, so let's jump in. So as Liz mentioned, there's the purpose of today, but there was also the purpose of the study. And so when Land to Table and KPU came on to work on the study, we were tasked with sort of 4 main themes or objectives. And that was to find joint purchasing solutions for this group to collectively reduce their purchasing costs throughout the entire supply chain, to develop tools that consider cost effectiveness, so considering inflation and how things might change over time, to better understand a rural-specific obstacle and the limitations of what comes with being in more geographically dispersed areas, and then to create strategy options based on the findings, both short and long-term, and recommended pilot actions to undertake those recommendations together. So we started off doing a very in-depth cost assessment and analysis of different procurement strategies. So we focused on what the food banks were already doing. So which retailers were they purchasing from, which wholesalers, the For Good Foundation, and which retailers or wholesalers or For Good Foundation products the food banks could purchase from, and then all the different transportation channels that could be used to move the food, and then had a pretty in-depth analysis of what all those different scenarios could look like. While that was really exciting, and we did find that there were cost savings in collectively purchasing with these different retailers or transportation options, the amount of cost saved wasn't necessarily enough to make everyone want to pivot their operations. And so we had to think about what else could happen and what types of bulk procurement, both from food recovery or food purchasing, the food banks could use to maybe change their approach that would have a larger effect. And so we really honed in on this opportunity in cost recovery programming. And cost recovery programming was seen as an immediate opportunity for the food banks to continue to working together and working within community to hopefully save costs. So for those who are unfamiliar with cost recovery programs, examples could be a good food box, an affordable market, maybe a frozen meal or soup program, or a recipe of the week program. And these are all programs that can cost clients anything from nothing to a set amount or maybe on a scale in between. And the benefit of having a cost recovery program is that it reduces the burden on food banks to solely provide free food to everyone all of the time. And the reason that this seemed to be sort of the prominent option out of just bulk purchasing collectively is because throughout the last few years, especially, food banks have been seeing this sort of in between or the missing middle of folks who can't necessarily afford groceries at the grocery store, but don't always need free food all of the time. And so creating these in-between options for folks to access affordable food on a more regular basis. And so we did a little bit of digging and some conversations with Hika Morton from the Gathering Market in Abbotsford. We found that there are some key elements of successful cost recovery programs. And this can include having referrals from your community partnering social agencies, that this programming can be more frequent and consistent, allowing better food access for the community collectively, that these programs are built around relationships and they help support your community and building these systems of support to reduce stigma and to build community and relationships around food and supporting each other. And then they also help integrate food literacy and educational opportunities, which can help empower clients and improve food security. And something Hika shared with us in one of our meetings was that cost recovery models have been identified as a way to move clients through food insecurity, so less of this Band-Aid model and more as a remedy. So out of the study, we had 6 different main themes that came out of the findings, and then 6 recommendations to go with those themes. And those were staff capacity, program development, food procurement, inventory management, relationship building, and infrastructure development. Staff capacity. So one of the challenges that the food banks are facing is that their staffing is restricted by a lack of core operational funding, which I'm sure most of you can relate with. And then also this over-reliance on volunteers and board members, many of whom are aging out and either can't perform the tasks that they have for a really long time, or not being able to find younger folks to replace them on boards or volunteer corps. And so our recommendations were to create shared coordinator positions or shared roles across food banks. And this would be a position or a role that serves all of the food banks to hopefully reduce duplicating efforts in food procurement and also in acquiring funding opportunities, like in writing grants. The shared cost of shared roles helps reduce the financial burden on individual food banks, and it can help folks capitalize on joint purchasing opportunities that maybe you wouldn't have been able to take on by yourselves. We recommended to test a new procurement-focused role, which would be low risk. So essentially having one person purchase or procure recovered food on behalf of these 4 food banks or more, and then which would allow your staff and your volunteers to focus on other tasks. The next main theme is program development. So I touched on this briefly with the cost recovery model, but the main finding was that continuing current purchasing levels is financially and operationally untenable. And this is because the COVID funding that supported many food banks is no longer around. There's reductions in emergency food distribution coming to rural food banks. And then, sorry, I've got a few things popping up here on my screen. And that there's these significant budget squeezes, either lack of core operational funding or, like I said, granting opportunities like from COVID. And so the hope is that through continued collaboration across these 4 food banks or as a larger collaborative, that you can share costs, you can increase efficiencies through joint food purchasing or procurement, and recovery towards new program development and implementation would be key to program development. Food procurement was key to this study, and there's a clear need and desire for shared procurement for both shelf-stable and bulk stocking, including fresh food. And so our recommendations were to capitalize on food procurement opportunities, ideally through having some type of shared procurement to leverage the identified pathways and channels in the study, and to trial different joint food procurement options, and to establish these efficient joint procurement systems, which could be through more efficient placing of orders, inventory management, stocking larger food orders to be able to have to do emergency distribution, or to utilize shared or rented space as needed in order to receive larger amounts of food. Inventory management was a key theme. There's a shared understanding that standardized inventory tracking used across all the food banks would make shared coordination more efficient and valuable. And this was really tricky when we were doing the data analysis, and that most food banks, especially smaller food banks, track their food in and food out in different ways, whether it's the amount of food in pounds or kilograms, or the cost of the food going in or out, especially to shared organizations, which makes it difficult for food banks to understand what they're going to need when exactly, and for who. And so having some type of shared inventory management system would make it easier to collaborate and sort of anticipate those needs and purchase in advance. And so one recommendation was to seek joint funding to create these inventory systems, to introduce them, to update them, and to complete the tracking systems where feasible. A key finding was relationship building, which probably is not a surprise for you, since our small towns and communities are truly built on the strength of the relationships we have. And so that involves getting local government and community partnerships involved in supporting the food bank, and realizing that with those connections and relationships comes innovation and opportunities in ways that maybe we couldn't have seen on our own. And then creating solidarity in approach and effort as a way to catalyze or address challenges and access funding opportunities. And we see this sort of in like a policy advocacy lens of, if everybody has a shared message and a shared goal, what can you accomplish if you're all in it together? And so some recommendations are to share the study with the folks in your community, with different partners and funders, to keep the conversation going and invite new folks in. So different partners and funders, bring them to the table, invite them to events, have them come to meetings, share with them how your projects are going and collaborative opportunities. Ideally, one day we can host a rural food bank summit to help share some of the findings of the study and what's come out of it since. And then to build relationships with these core partners within your communities. So different procurement and recovery channels, different food banking bodies like Food Banks BC and Food Banks Canada, your local government representatives, different funders, your local school districts, and maybe individual schools, and also the immigrant services, tourisms, and resorts if those exist in your community. And we'll probably hear a little bit more about that today and what that looks like in resort communities. And then finally, infrastructure development. So this one is really key. I'd mentioned in both the cost recovery models and in the bulk purchasing models that in order to do that, you need to have the space and the cold storage and the infrastructure to do so. And so a key finding was that infrastructure development is needed to support the growth of cross-regional and sustainable models of food banking. And so our recommendations were that long-term infrastructure planning needs to be part of food bank planning in general. And that is to have permanent infrastructure to enhance collaborative procurement, recovery, and storage capabilities, and to consider warehouse space as an opportunity to help house some of these larger orders. And in doing so, food banks can become like a wholesale distributor, being sort of a hub to be able to get food to different smaller organizations or other small food banks in regions that aren't supported by larger urban centers because of issues like transportation, like Katrina alluded to. There's potential to become a Food Banks BC regional hub if you are in a place and have the infrastructure to help facilitate those distributions. And then also having this infrastructure to store large amounts of food would be key during emergencies. So there's a large focus right now on emergent response and government. And if you think that your food bank or a partnership across your community would be good to house food in a time of climate disruption or COVID, then this could be an opportunity to have infrastructure in order to store food to distribute in those times of disruption. So that was a super quick overview of a very large study over almost the course of a year. And like I said, I encourage you to dig into the PDF that's in the chat, but we're gonna hear from these food banks and what their experience was getting into this study, how it was throughout, and how things have likely changed over the last, 5 months or so since the study wrapped up. And so we're going to jump into a fishbowl, Zoom style, for those who have participated in fishbowls in the past. And so we're going to spotlight our rural food banks that participated in this study, and they are going to have a conversation between themselves. So if you put something in the chat, Liz or I will track it, and we'll make sure that that question or that comment gets seen. But we really want them to have sort of a conversation between the four of them and for you to witness what those experiences were like for them as a group going through the study. And then at the end, we'll have an opportunity for folks to ask them questions and also for you to share your own stories. So like I said before, hold on to those questions and hold on to those stories, and I promise that there will be space for them. So we are going to jump into our fishbowl, which is going to require me to stop sharing and spotlight our food banks here. Sorry, I don't have any fun music while I do this. Here we go. We've got Janet and Julia. Thank you for being patient. All right. Can we see our 4 food banks here?
I can only see 2. I only have Janet and Julia.
All right. Liz, if you want to kick us off with the questions, I will play around here with it for a moment.
Sounds good. So maybe Julia and Janet in particular, because you were part of the 2 folks who were initiating this study and the collaborative approach that you took through the study. Perhaps you want to begin, and actually, I'll just pause for a sec. You'll notice like Sammy was really just sharing the overview of kind of the key findings. So please feel free in your conversation with each other to just like remember how it was and maybe some of the tensions that we bumped up against and how we kind of reached this pivot where we weren't where we decided to change tack in terms of what those final recommendations were going to look like. But Julia and Janet, you might be the folks to start us off in terms of how you began, why you took this on together, why you decided to begin collaboratively, where did the funding come from, and maybe what was the problem you were trying to solve or the questions you were trying to answer. And I will not try not to interrupt. I think you all have kind of the prompting questions. This is just a conversation amongst you four that we get to witness. Thank you.
Go ahead, Julia.
Thanks, Liz and Sammy. So I'll say a bit about what the situation was in Golden in terms of how this sort of began and kicked off as far as the conversation went. So our circumstances were that we had seen a bit of an uptake in use over COVID for sure. Our numbers in 2020 and 2021 were higher than they'd been in let's say 2019, but not so much that kind of outpouring of funding that had come in that it made sense for us to spend it all in those years. So for the first time in the Golden Food Bank's history, they were able to sort of squirrel away a surplus or a reserve that the board at the time thought, oh, our location is in a house, a converted house turned into a food bank, which has been a great kind of transition place for us. But they thought, this isn't going to be a great long-term location, so let's kind of earmark that money for a capital infrastructure project and set it away. Invested some in staff, hired their first executive director, but otherwise thought it would be for a rainy day. And then March of 2022 hit, and we just saw a massive uptake in use very quickly as inflation kind of went off and the cost of housing and rents were rapidly increasing. And so by the time we hit sort of fall of 2022, we were in a situation where we'd gone from maybe going to the grocery store once a week, maybe every other week, and buying somewhere between $200 and $300 worth of maybe some fresh produce, maybe some pantry items to kind of top off what we had from food recovery and donated food. We would get a large amount of food from the Calgary Food Bank from their kind of food share program. And by the time we hit September, we were like doing multiple carts and it was just getting more and more and more that we were purchasing. So Eric, our food security coordinator, can be a bit of a spreadsheet and a graph guy. And so he sat down one day, I think in a fit of anxiety, and marked out kind of our increase in use compared to our food recovery, compared to how much we were purchasing, and sort of did a bit of an extrapolation to figure out how much food we would need to purchase over time and how much food was going to be required if our usage numbers continued to go up, which, spoiler alert, they did and have not stopped since. So at that point, he kind of came into my office and showed me this terrifying graph. And as we started to talk it out, it kind of went, okay, well, where are we getting this food? It became clear that we were going to need to pull money out of reserves and start to put that towards a purchasing budget. And then the question then is, how do we make the best use of these funds and make them go as far as they possibly can? And so the question in my mind was, what's going on with other food banks? We can't be alone. We feel like we're kind of isolated with this problem, but there's food banks and communities all around us that we just wanted to know what was going on for them and whether they were purchasing food and whether they were seeing the same trends. So I can speak a little bit later on in terms of how I got rolling from those initial conversations into this funded feasibility study. But I'll pass it to Janet kind of around the room in terms of just what was going on at your food banks during that time, 2022.
So for us, I think there was a whole lot of things that happened sort of all at one time. There was this kind of perfect storm of we better do something here because where we're going is not sustainable. So a first piece of it was that I had noted for sort of several years that in comparison to other communities, even some other rural communities, our support from our local grocery store. So we have just one grocery store, and then we have a bargain shop that does carry some food as well. But the support from our grocery store was not really resulting in any recovered food. And that hadn't been a terrific worry for us. And that the reason for that was that we live in a tourism economy. Our grocery store is so attuned to its need to be so cautious that they literally don't have a lot to share. They order just what they need. And in the winter months in particular, they like literally, when you go there at 5 p.m, there isn't a loaf of bread to be had. There isn't. I mean, they're so cautious. There really isn't recovered food to have. So that relationship with them and not receiving the like other people, other food banks telling me they, took a van at the end of every day and were picking up food, was certainly not happening in my community. And we were doing everything that we could do in terms of exchanging with others. We exchanged with a group called Second Harvest in Salmon Arm. They would bring bread and baked goods, things that they recovered, and we would send them things we were recovering. We had been very fortunate up until that time. As Julia said, we also received extra funding during COVID. Definitely, the use had increased, but we had received enough to think we were going to be okay for another year or so. And then, starting in 2022, that with the inflation, the numbers went up enormously in our community in terms of use. But we had one huge advantage, and that was that we had a truck driver who lived in our community who made arrangements with the grocery supplier he worked for to be able to drop recovered food off at our food bank rather than truck it back to Calgary on his return trip. And so he would, when he came back up from his travels, like he would go to Calgary, pick up food. Then there was a dispatcher at his grocery outlet that was also from the Shuswap, and so he started to put things aside. And so we were regularly getting recovered food of all types, but a lot of produce. We were getting a lot of fresh food, and so we opened this room called the free produce room, and that was giving our community access to produce. We always had the basics, potatoes and onions and things. We would have oranges and apples and things like that regularly, and so that was a huge piece of how we were managing. And then that ended. He retired, and then so we didn't have anyone then to drop food off for us. And so sort of at that point we realized like there's no way we're making it if we don't figure out something else. And so I had been talking to Revelstoke and talking to Golden, around this idea that rural food banks, unless they had something special happening in their community, were really struggling and were not able to access it in the same way that urban food banks were accessing. So just to explore that was really, like, at that time where we were at that time was really important. It was that, or we were looking at not operating food security programs anymore. Anna.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, a year ago, like similar experiences to everyone else, which is, cost of food had been going up for last 4 years, and looking down the pipe, I think a year ago in 2022, we knew that we couldn't continue spending the same way we had been because of funding that had like disappeared. Speaking with like the other food banks, and having questions around like how we can put our dollars best to use, but like knowing that, say, Janet over in Sicamous, you guys have a connection to the Okanagan, and then we have more infrastructure to like hold things than other food banks in the region. And then if we can like piece these bits together and then figure out a way to yeah. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous. Maybe Katrina, you start.
Well, yeah, sure. So 2022, we did start with our food recovery initiative. So that I think in some respects was a late start in comparison, but that would have definitely been a component, is how can we expand this? The increase has been continuing for us, like everyone else. Right now, we're sitting at what I'm looking at might be like 100% increase in a 2-year time frame of hamper distribution. So that's quite shocking, you know, and something we need to really, you know, diversify around, I think, as a network. The other piece is definitely just our location. So because we're we're in between Highway 1 and Highway 3, and so costs just automatically go up because of getting here. And so some of even the programs that are offered through Food Banks Canada, we're not even eligible to receive. Even like the protein project, it's not really that cost effective for us to use it because we have to drive to Cranbrook to pick it up, right? So there's those limitations. So again, I wasn't here when that relationship was prompted, but now that I'm involved in it, I definitely see the benefit and I see what the foresight was. And I've also had an opportunity to speak with Cranbrook outside of this study and definitely recognize that there's opportunities for collaboration. So we're really excited.
Yeah, so I think from there, it initially started as a couple of Zoom calls where we sort of just shared our story, and that felt so valuable and good and validating. Like truly you kind of feel alone with these very big capital B problems. And so being able to just be in a virtual room together and say like, yes, us too, when we're worried and we're not really sure what direction to go, that was really helpful. And so it started with an initial spreadsheet of just kind of, here are the food items that we're all buying. And then another spreadsheet that was just tracking how many clients are you serving, what is your food purchasing budget been over years, just a really basic data collection. And then Melissa Hemphill, who was at Community Connections at the time, and Sheena, their executive director, they had a connection with a private funder who had supported the development of their new food bank and neighborhood kitchen, and they were coming through for a tour of the building and asking what was kind of coming down the pipe or what was going on now. And they'd shared this story of these kind of calls that had been convened and sort of what rural food banks were facing. And the funder identified right then and there that, you know, we were all doing this off the side of our desks, but really this was a whole job to figure out what kind of joint procurement opportunities would be. And then another question that was in there for us, it wasn't an us versus them of urban and rural food banks by any stretch, but just as demand was increasing, and we were all figuring out what to kind of best do with our budgets and to navigate this. Just realizing that food recovery was a larger opportunity in urban centers. Similar to Janet, we would get large shipments from the Calgary Food Bank through their food share program, as well as the the food sharing through the Central Okanagan as our distribution partner for NFSS. And the Calgary Food Bank let us know that they were kind of indefinitely ceasing that program because they needed their food in the city. And so again, just this, how are we getting food to our communities question, and what does that look like in terms of an urban context versus a rural context in terms of how our funding is stretched and how we allocate dollars. So Food Banks BC got involved, thankfully. They were a joint funder and supporter of the project, and we're really in support of that, of helping us kind of tell our story and look at that in terms of data, numbers, and budgets to figure out the difference between urban and rural food banks. So that's how the funder got involved, and we were able to do a request for proposals, and then Land to Table showed up on the scene, and they had a great connection with the sort of the Okanagan and local producers. And although we were kind of looking at pantry basics and staples, that was our focus. We were excited that Land to Table would be able to bring in that lens as well of local producers and growers and what capacity they might have to support and making sure we were getting fresh kind of regionally grown produce into our food banks as well. So then we launched into a whole big research project.
So I think maybe I would just start about sort of what the problem we were trying to solve was. I think I already, you know, have said sort of what it was that led us into the study. But in the time between getting engaged and saying we were interested in being involved in the study, and when the study began to happen, there were other things that kept coming up for me, and they became, I think, a part of the focus of the study. And the problem sort of that I was trying to solve, if you want to call it a problem, was that one kind of food service didn't seem to be working for everyone. in our community, we were seeing families where I felt, you know, almost that we were placed in a position of needing to make choices between families that we knew were really struggling and families that were using food security services just because they were finding it a struggle to get to the end of the month and give their children everything they need. In particular, when we lost a lot of the produce, and we had to start to replace that produce with buying, we you know, started to look more closely at who's using the free produce room. It has a separate door, and so we there's a little bell that rings. It's part of our alarm system, so we know how often it's being used a day, but you know, we're not necessarily monitoring who goes in. And that's sort of really when we realized that a huge number of families and seniors were dropping in there every single day for their, you know, for their daily produce. And we started to look a little bit more closely without, you know, interviewing people at sort of, you know, who was using and why. We did talk to some families, and really sort of realized that there were really two groups of people using food services in our community, and that then it became, I think, a part of the study did become conversations about what is emergency food use, and then what are possible, you know, food recovery type programs. You know, are they possible? How complicated are they to run? And so for us, by the time we got into the study, that became also a sort of problem we were trying to solve. Is, you know, who is our food bank client, and is it emergency need, or are we looking for some other kind of service?
Yeah, and I think another thing that was going on at that time was just we were realizing we had different approaches to how we were getting food, and Hannah alluded to this, just what were the ways that we could kind of capitalize on the strengths at certain locations, and then work together to address some of the challenges at other locations. So I know for you, Katrina and Janet, you guys were in a different position in terms of who, from like a staffing or personnel perspective, was doing the work of procuring food compared to Revelstoke or Golden, where we had a staff position that was procuring food. So yeah, Katrina, I think it's interesting, and Janet as well, just to share what actually the reality is in terms of the procurement side of who is getting that food for you, or how is that process looking?
Sure, yeah. Okay, so currently the procurement is, our main source of procurement is actually weekly purchasing. And so every Thursday we do have a volunteer that comes in, and based on our grocery list, which is basically what we give in a hamper distribution model, where we do offer people choices in the sense of what don't you want, and some choices around like white or brown bread, coffee or tea. But for the most part, it's the grocery list that they get, right? And so what we are short on to a certain quantity will be purchased on a weekly basis. And then that order will be sent directly to our local grocery store, AG Valley Foods. And it's been an excellent partnership. They then actually deliver it to us for free every week, and then give us return, basically give us a donation in return to bring it down to a wholesale cost for us, right? But even still, you know, I'm finding like some of the more affordable items aren't necessarily the most quality items, which that's a question at play. Is, you know, could we spend some of this money on, you know, no name brand KD onto something, you know, more health oriented, right? So these are the types of questions. Then as far as other procurement strategies, it was actually first of all, our chairperson, who at that time she was a volunteer, and then she became a chairperson, and then carried on with some of her volunteer activities, such as procurement, in the chair role, right? And so she was doing quite a lot of that. And I was hired as the ED last January, and that was the first time this organization had ever had an ED. So the year was spent really getting my feet underneath of me, trying to figure that out. And so now I am doing a lot more procurement, and I'm much more familiar with what's happening with the Kelowna hub and how we can get food from there, and getting more acquainted with the different channels through which we can actually get pallets worth of food, and just that relationship with the protein project and what have you, and anything that just kind of happens on sort of the jump that you need to really jump on. And so and even the developments around the second harvest and the food recovery relationships and how we structure that program, I'm now better equipped to set that up, right? But it is definitely a dance between myself and our chair, who's also our volunteer procurement coordinator.
So for Sicamous, we have also never not had a staff person. We have a couple of very dedicated volunteers that, you know, that there one woman in particular who's been absolutely wonderful for years, treats the role like a job and turns up most days to help us. But procurement was being managed by myself. I would, you know, try to sort of find the food and everything, and then often worked with our resource and referral person who does a bit of our admin. She would sometimes be the one making sort of final arrangements with suppliers, but it was always an enormous challenge to access food. Just you know, the hub food that comes from National Food Sharing Program is has, you know, there's been access. We get emails. It says it's there, but being able to take quantities and you know, like sometimes for us, like I think it was a year or so ago, maybe it's not quite that long, that, you know, we took an enormous amount of rice. That's what sort of was available. And while we certainly do need rice, we've had times when we were buying rice. It's, you know, we have to find, you know, other places to share those big loads with. And so that piece, as you know, takes time as well. You know, finding other food banks who may need that, or not necessarily food banks, but we you know, also provided food when we had excess. We provided food to a number of food programs and stuff that are not, you know, necessarily food banks, meals, schools, things like that. So that the whole food procurement piece, you know, it was taking a lot of time to both get food and then try to distribute to others when it was large quantity. And then we had the same experience with things like Protein Project and others, just to, you know, for what we needed and the storage we would have to take advantage of some of those things just wasn't happening. And so that sort of led us to this place of, you know, there's a whole lot of things that have to change for our food bank in order to be able to make accessing food sustainable. We did always easiest, to be frank. You know, what comes down to easiest is can we just go and buy it? And so when we do struggle with things, you know, and the you know, gals that help clients to put the food hampers together come to me and say, you know, we're almost out of tuna. To be honest, that often happens when we're almost out of tuna. And so it's go to the store and buy it, and then I am totally shocked when I see the bill. So it's that's kind of how we've been handling procurement. Haven't had a staff person to do it, and that's, you know, that's something that has to change for us.
And Hannah, I think in Revelstoke, I mean, it was on your role, it was your task to do, but just a stretch to balance that with all the other things that a small staff team also needed to accomplish for a fairly, you know, in terms of rural context, large food bank.
Yeah. And I think like at one point last year, we did have a flush budget to buy food, but then all of a sudden that changed quite quickly, where we just like couldn't buy anything anymore, and that made us aware of how reliant we are on food recovery as part of what we hand out to people each week. And obviously food recovery in nature is very unreliable, so yeah, looking for ways that we can access that in support of other people.
Yeah, I think this shared staff capacity was for sure the through line on the study. I think our experience now is that, like, it's a stretch. It's not a normal thing or anything anybody's done before to sort of hire, in our context anyways, like a shared coordinator that's working on behalf of multiple food banks. But that remains the curiosity, and that's the idea in terms of our pilot project, is what if, rather than every food bank kind of having their own systems around this and trying to figure out the budget and where they're buying from, and you know, what are sometimes the barriers with these things in terms of NFSS, of being able to take larger shipments for how much you're going to need over the number of months compared to like the infrastructure that we have to actually hold that food, or sort of where is the place to get the best price, or kind of when do you need what products at different times and how to coordinate that. That there's a lot of opportunity for us to actually have one person that's familiar with all of our different food bank operations and be able to do the ordering. But as I think we've kind of alluded to in different ways, circumstances really changed over the course of the study, where we sort of at the outset, all of us had to some degree different purchasing budgets that were supported by funding that had come in from provincial funding and federal funding and community donations over those COVID years when food banks really had a spotlight, to now these circumstances where our usage and demand has never been higher, but that funding's just not coming. So we're similar, where we kind of ratcheted up our purchasing over 2022 and 2023, and now our purchasing budget is much lower because we just don't, I can't responsibly do it without, not even having a track for the Golden Food Bank for the next year or two. We would just be spending all the money that we have. And so that purchasing piece of, okay, if we are purchasing food at these rates, yes, there's some cost savings, but if we're just on the turning around and giving all that food out for free, like Janet said, this emergency-based model, there's no sustainability in that. And then also, is it really the purchased food? Is that our only opportunity here? Or is this, like kind of said, we're so dependent on food recovery, and really from a dollars and cents point of view, figuring out how to transport recovered food and store recovered food is still way cheaper than needing to pay. It's not retail, we get discounts, but basically retail prices for food. Food's just expensive. It doesn't really come down that much when you're buying even larger quantities together as a collective. So I'll just kind of where we're headed now. I think what's kind of become the curiosity for us after learning about how these models have worked in other maybe larger centers or areas where towns and communities are closer together geographically, is having these sort of procurement and distribution hubs where food recovery partners are being directed to one location. Like Janet said, when you have that larger volume, it's going to one place that actually has the system set up to be able to distribute that out to smaller food banks. So you can have that, yes, when a larger shipment comes available, maybe storing food that was available at a really good price, but smaller food banks can only take it for, can only take smaller quantities, and they need to kind of be dosed inventory when they're ready. And so we feel like the opportunity here is to some degree our food banks are for food banks, but to a much larger degree, kind of who needs food in our communities, whether it's like the school food programs and the Feeding Futures funding, other food banks that are in that same kind of shipping and distribution line. We know there's opportunity with Cranbrook, and Kimberley falls on that run as well. And so we've seen this model in other communities of distribution hubs where they kind of build up the infrastructure in one community, or kind of have some shared infrastructure. And so that's what this is kind of moving towards. The infrastructure piece is a big one for us, because even if we had a shared coordinator, we all hit up on small storage capacity. So that person will be doing a lot of movement of small amounts of food, whereas if we're able to get some warehouse space, so we've made an application in with United Way for a leased warehouse that we can kind of pilot this out as our hope, to be able to procure larger amounts of food, have a storage facility where that food could come to if needed, and then be distributed out, whether it's for our food banks or other food programs, better homes or school districts in the region. So yeah, that's kind of where it's headed and what we're dreaming of now.
I think the other piece that came from this, it was if we also had Golden and Sicamous were both accessing food from the east, and so I think that was another piece of this, is that just the knowledge that what can be accessed by grocery companies and everything that are actually delivering in our area from Calgary, not from Vancouver. And so it was a piece of that as well, that if we we know they're coming into our area, but we know they're not stopping at every food bank along the way, and so it makes sense that that it would stop at Golden. It would probably make it simplest for the grocery suppliers, like AG Food is one that, that our food supply to this area comes from a Calgary outlet. And so if, if that food can be dropped in, in one place and then distributed from Golden to the rest of us when it can be, when we have storage for it, and that, that makes sense for us.
Yeah, and to Liz's point just there in the chat, the transportation opportunities then when we're at that smaller scale. So we were able to, our local home hardware, there's a joint ownership between the Golden and the Invermere locations. And so they've said that they've got empty trucks going back and forth in between our communities. And so when we do have those smaller quantities of food that we need moved, that sort of back channeling or looking at what transportation is already happening, and interest from businesses who say, yeah, we're not able to give you a financial donation, but we do have trucks on the road, that if you're able to kind of figure it out with scheduling and our logistics, that we can make that work.
Yeah, and I had spoken with Valley Direct, and they were really keen on the idea of us buying together and that it would reduce our costs. So I know the research was done on that, but he wants to work with food banks. So as soon as they, retailers find out about it, then, or wholesalers, then, maybe their wheels get turning as well, right? Which is nice. We also do have developments here on a food recovery initiative that's outside of the organization that we'll work with. And we do have a decent amount of basement space, actually, so that would allow us to receive more than others. And there has been occasions where, initially when we started a relationship with Golden, I believe it was because you had an excess of meat, right? And then in the end, a couple of years later, we were able to reciprocate that offering, right? So just having those relationships between regions is really beneficial, because you just never know when you might just have something extra to share.
Yeah, I think I just sort of thinking in terms of the last piece of sort of what this has meant to us. What is that process of exploring all these things? First off, I want to say that Land to Table did an incredible job of taking what might have seemed in the beginning like this is a simple question that we have. How are we going to sort of work together into something that became very complicated, very broad. Shout out to Nick from Food Banks BC as well for for jumping in and being prepared to have discussions about what was outside of our outside of the norm. But just this, I mean, the conversation was broadened a lot, where where it's possible for us to go was broadened a lot. And I think some of the things in a sort of small way are already starting. We've had a bit of time to explore some things that were obvious, and so there are some small wins, as Julia alluded to. Home hardware is prepared to support, and so in some of that asking questions and looking for information. This relationship with Valley Direct, we had not ever been involved with Valley Direct before. The fellow has been wonderful. He's accepting orders from us that are $200 and $300 and dropping it off and being lovely about it. And so that those things are helping. And then it turns out that Revelstoke Food Bank, which I didn't know, receives D. Dutchman Dairy, which is in our community, milk regularly. And so Hannah sends back bread with the D. Dutchman driver to us. So some of these things, the study sort of has gone beyond the study point, and we are starting to to move forward.
And the other piece too I want to mention is the cost recovery component, because we weren't prepared to shift our model or anything. Being that I'm a new ED, there's still lots of development on the transitional board component, right? So lots of internal developments going on, and shifting our entire operations isn't really in the game plan. But it was able to, that notion was something that gave me the power to say to my board, hey, we do get these farmers market nutrition coupons that we can distribute. So let's, add our purchasing power to those so that we can start to instigate autonomy and purchasing autonomy for those who seek our services. And so that is one channel through which we were able to diversify our offering, right? And I think it just starts that conversation to more creative solutions.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing fishbowl. There's plenty more time to chime in. I'm just going to unspotlight you. So feel free, Julia, to continue with your thought. And we're just going to open this up into a group conversation. I know Jennifer had a question in the chat. So Julia, why don't you keep on going, and then we'll just enter this group sphere.
Yeah, I was just gonna very quickly just on Katrina's note, because the cost recovery piece was in there. So as a result of the study and meeting Hika at the Gathering Market, we were able to get some local funding through Columbia Basin Trust to pilot a cost recovery program. So we currently have our Neighbors Affordable Market that just launched a couple of weeks ago. And so that just to mention that this kind of these new procurement channels, we're purchasing from Valley Direct, and then we're selling some of the food that we're getting at a subsidized cost through an affordable market program. That's all.
That's all. No big deal. That's amazing. I didn't know that. That's news to me. I didn't know that that was up and running and that you got CBT funding. So that's fantastic. If it isn't obvious, I think probably like this group in working together and continuing to talk and collaborate are taking the next steps, and I think in really innovative and exciting ways that I just wanted to highlight. But then this is on to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to pull in Jen's question here. She asked, has anyone partnered with the home hardware? I know Julia and Katrina are working on that partnership to do pickups for them, and just wondering if that actually works. So can you just speak a little bit more to that home hardware relationship?
Yeah, we were able to, through the kind of process of the study and having conversations just to see what local businesses might have vehicles already moving in between our communities, reached out to our local home hardware, and they were really, really excited. And again, we kind of need this shared coordinator role to really be able to make this like a regular procedure, because we are still at this point, while we put in our application for the pilot project, kind of doing this off the side of our desks. But we were able to do a shipment with them where we actually did an order from No Frills in Invermere just because the prices were really good. And Home Hardware brought it over for free to us. And then they've also said if we needed a food transporter between our food bank and Invermere, that they'd be willing. So I think the key is that their vehicles need to already be traveling this route, and that you need to be able to make it. Our experience in that one was we needed to make it very, very easy and foolproof. You'll kind of, dent the relationship at the get-go if it's complicated for them or details are changing, or you're not entirely sure. So we worked really hard to make sure that it was very, very simple for their driver and their staff. And at the end, we took a great photo and everybody was so excited, and yeah, they were so thrilled to be able to support.
Thanks, Julia. Does anyone else in the audience have any direct questions for the 4 food banks here after hearing their conversation? And if they come to you later, feel free to put them in the chat. From Linda Boyd, I think, is Katrina. Katrina's taken a break, Linda, so we'll circle back to that question when she comes back. But I'm going to pop into the chat here just some of the themes that came out of the study and some of the topics that the group discussed. And we are so excited to hear from maybe some of the other food banks or food security initiatives on this call today, how maybe you are grappling with these themes or barriers, or any innovative ideas you've had related to them, like staff capacity, program development, food procurement, inventory management, relationship building, infrastructure development, or maybe something else.
And a question just popped in there from Melissa Blair, who's in Kelowna. If Julia can just share a little bit more about the logistics and qualifiers around your market, like how's it working? What are you doing? Yeah.
Sure. So it was really based around, we had started a Recipe of the Week program in 2023, also from some Columbia Basin Trust funding. The initial intention of that funding from the board member right before I was hired that had written it, was that we would kind of move into what the Kimberley Food Recovery Hub is doing, where they take in recovered food and then create prepared meals and then distribute these prepared kind of frozen meals out to the community. We don't have an on-site kitchen, commercial scale, or anything like that, but there was a thought that we could use kind of rented commercial kitchens in town and create meals. And thankfully I had a staff member who kind of reinvented that and said, we can create recipe of the week meal kits that kind of incorporate recovered food that we need to move through, as well as ingredients that people aren't as familiar using, and provide people with recipes and pre-portioned meal kits and get them cooking in their own homes. So we already had that going, although the funding had run out. And so the question was, how do we kind of continue this amazing program and make it sustainable in the long run? So we were already kind of thinking about cost recovery. And then when we met Hika through this study, who runs the Gathering Market in Abbotsford, her affordable market is very much based around meal kits as well. And so the pieces just came together and it clicked. So in terms of the logistics for that, so we have volunteers that come in, and we've just ramped up the volunteer capacity, but we kind of already had like a portioning area in our basement and all those things to make the recipe of the week program work. So volunteers come in, they portion out ingredients. Our education coordinator comes up with the recipes and what ingredients need to go in. And then we look at, because we kind of have an array of recipes now that we use, we sort of know what are base ingredients that we need to buy in larger quantities to be portioned out. And then that's also informing what pantry items we're purchasing. So people can always buy some fresh items and pantry items. And so they're all based around kind of, it's a meal-based approach. Like, what can people actually make at home with these items that is fresh and a home-cooked meal, versus sometimes that food bank focus on, you know, the noodles or the KD, or, you know, just like high calorie, easy, convenient, and cheap. And so it's based around meal kits. The meal kits are available for purchase at $10 per meal kit. We allow anybody that is, whether you access the food bank, you're enrolled in the affordable market program, or you're just a community member who needs food support, that we have this $10 recipe of the week meal kit you can purchase. And then if you're enrolled in the affordable market program, you can purchase up to 4 a week. And then we have fresh produce and baking kits and smoothie kits available as well. And in terms of the qualifiers for that, so we were following Hika's model out of Abbotsford of looking for community referrals. So other social service agencies who had existing relationships with people that they could kind of let them know about the program and refer them over. We also chatted with some people that were accessing the food bank and to see if they would be interested in moving over. So currently we've got 15 households, or 12, sorry, enrolled. We have room for 30. So we just launched. So we're looking to fill those spaces. And in my experience so far, we're literally just a week in, but the people who are used to accessing the food bank program, they're grateful, they appreciate it, they think it's great, but they've been buying less. They kind of are like, I think they're used to kind of seeing the items, and it's maybe like, well, if I'm getting this for free, why would I now buy? But for sure they're participating, and it's a bit of a change in behavior piece. Whereas the people who have never been comfortable accessing a food bank and would not be coming here if it wasn't for this alternative program model, like, I get shivers. Like, they are so excited. They have not been getting any support. They are not comfortable with the food bank program. They're coming in with their kids. The kids are super stoked shopping. It's just a totally different paradigm. And this idea that there's like this gap between emergency food relief and retail grocery stores, I won't be surprised if this continues to be what's kind of proven, is that there's this whole segment of people that do have some resources to spend. They're being priced out of the grocery store. They're not accessing food banks. But if you can kind of provide the food in a different model, and it's a bit more participatory, and they are paying some money for that food, there's kind of a whole segment of people that we can reach that currently are just not being supported. And the meal kits are a family-sized meal. So we say 4 to 6 portions. So if you have a family, that's going to give you, everybody's going to get dinner and some leftovers. Or if you're a single person, lots of people will use the recipe of the week meal kit in between their hampers, and they'll make it on, like, let's say, a Sunday, and then they know they have like a meal a day over the course of the week.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's incredible. Congratulations on the program. And I'd love to connect with you offline to learn a little bit more, because we're trying to do something very similar in Kelowna with sort of an affordable low-income grocery store. So I'd love to extract what you've learned and build upon your ideas and see how we could support.
Yeah, and that's honestly idea. I think if you look in the study where we talk about the cost recovery model, where we're like, it's never going to be the same thing in every community, but this is kind of new territory and new ground. So if we can make connections between organizations who are kind of starting out on this path, and learn what we can and share vendors or processes or procedures, that's sort of the idea in terms of the cost recovery piece. Is it's not going to be the same, but we can work together to kind of to launch into this.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Right. I'd just like to add from Sycamoose, the information, the research that was done by Land to Table gave us a lot of ideas about how we could broaden from just emergency food service. But for us, it's a process. We had been working for the past several years on building. We've always had a teaching kitchen in our building for many years and have done food skills for families and that kind of program. But we have been working on replacing all, our sort of household appliances with proper commercial appliances, and have spent about $75,000 in the last few years to create a commercial kitchen in our building. So we are getting there, but in order to carry on with ideas that would sort of maybe separate that population of emergency food hampers with people who could afford to purchase a bit more, we have applied for United Way grant that would see a significant shift in the footprint of the food bank in our building and the food bank spaces, because that would need to happen in order for us to do that. So we absolutely intend as well to move sort of in that direction of of recognizing that we have different people with different food needs. And then also the other piece that we're very keen on is preparing meals that can be delivered to homebound seniors. We also operate the Better at Home program here, and so that's a piece we're working on. And then meal programs for some underserved populations. We have single moms with little ones who sometimes say it's not about the food, it's about the getting it ready and all of that piece. And then we have a group in our community. They're primarily have substance use and other addictive challenges that are, that they're a group, they're a community of their own. They support each other, they help each other, and so that's a very underserved group. We have seniors meals programs, but no other access. And so we are, going down the road of really. I think this for us, there was a question, I think, in our questions about the aha moment, and I think for us it was a realization that it doesn't have to be one thing. It doesn't have to be one thing. We're a small community, but with the right things in place, we can serve a lot of different needs. And so that's where we are going next. If we are able to reconfigure the food bank space in our building, we would also be able to operate a small market, and as well as emergency food.
A couple questions in the chat here. Katrina, can you speak a little bit more about how you've integrated the nutrition coupon program and any added funding that maybe increases the amounts?
Yeah, sure. So so far we've accomplished and succeeded in 2 funding streams and are looking at an additional one. So we actually had our local Kinsman Club contribute to purchase an additional 6 households worth of coupons. So that was, I think it was $2,268 they contributed. And so then we actually just are able to purchase those coupons and then distribute them as the community partner. And then we also had another community service organization that had identified 2 senior families that they wanted to be able to distribute the coupons on behalf of their clients, and had some funding to be able to purchase coupons for those households, and then would also do the actual grocery shopping for them. And so I was able to get permission from Farmers Market, BC Association of Farmers Markets, to also purchase those 2 households worth of coupons. I actually sent an invoice directly to that community organization, and then those coupons will come to us and I distribute them to them, and that's the relationship. And then I'll be asking our regional district areas. There's 2 areas that we're in, F and G, and we'll be looking at the discretionary grant and aid. So had I known about that sooner, I would have done it already, but now we're at the July meeting, and so hopefully we'll get some additional funding for the end of the season. And the coupon program does require that what we're allotted is given to a set number of families, a set number of households for the duration of the coupon season. We did follow that protocol for the original, like the additional 8 that I just described. And then any additional funding I receive will be so that all the other people that just want coupons maybe twice or 4 times during the season will still have access. So it opens it up quite a bit.
So just Sicamous is also involved in the Farmers Market Association coupon program. We have been for several years, and we are sort of trying as well to build how that plays out, how that program supports food bank families. And we're at the market. We go to actually the market in our community. We and the Legion share a huge parking lot, and the market happens in that parking lot. And so we attend the market, and then we have found that through the Farmers Market Coupon Program and the connection to farmers that we are able to access more farm produce by being involved in the market. And so for sure, that's another area, the Farmers Market Association and all of those sort of, our market organizers and, have also sort of helped to support this idea of diversifying how we support families.
Amazing. Julia popped in the chat here. Eager to hear from the rest of you on the call. I'm only familiar with a few folks, but Tom, Lita, Jen, I'm familiar with you and your food bank operations. Maybe sharing a little bit about how you're dealing with increased need or some of these different themes and how you are adapting or facing challenges. For anybody else who I may not be familiar with.
I'm not a food bank, but I just wanted to say one thing about the Farmers Market Coupon Program and just share that Enderby, for example, is not a member of the Farmers Market Association of BC, and so they were never eligible to participate in that coupon program, yet they saw great value in that program and a great need in their community. And their food bank actually created their own coupon program modeled after the Farmers Market Coupon Program, and it's they do well, the first year they ran it, it was the same amounts as the coupons that were given out by Farmers Market of BC. And I think they might have had to reduce the costs due to less funding this year, but they just had a generous donor in the community that funded that program. So just wanted to put it out there, if you are in a community that doesn't have a farmers market that's part of the association, that it is possible to create your own program if you can find funding for it.
Yeah, that's good to know about Enderby, actually, even being their neighbors. I didn't know that they had created their own program, so that's awesome to hear. We are partners in that same program. It's awesome. Our clients love it, and a lot of times it supplements our need to provide produce for them. So a lot of people will stop accessing the food bank through the summer months because they're getting enough supplement of whatever from the farmers market, and then they'll also like stock up for winter. So that's really cool. We love it. They love it. As far as like meeting the needs of our growing numbers and stuff, we're just floundering like everyone else in purchasing everything right now. Like our donations have pretty much dried up and stopped financially, and physical donations to the food bank. So for the first time ever, we've just been purchasing everything, including non-perishables. We're in the same boat as everyone else. Our local grocery store isn't partnering with us for food recovery, and then we can't access the Vernon, even though a lot of our resources are in Vernon. So we ourselves as a town access Vernon all the time. Grocery shopping and that sort of stuff. Those stores don't really want to donate to the small food banks that are around Vernon. So Vernon kind of has like they just want to donate back to the Vernon Center itself. So we're like everyone else. We don't really have that access to food recovery other than through like partnerships with some of the other food banks that are willing to share, and or through like Lake Country provides us with a huge amount of extras, food recovery that we'd never have access to otherwise. And yeah, so we're just purchasing right now, but definitely it's in the back of my mind that I have to figure out something else because we can't sustain this type of purchasing. Like it's every week and we're just so busy just every week. I mean, I just got bulk groceries from the wholesale club and now my volunteers like, well, we're all out of those again. So I'm like, oh shoot. So you know, instead of once a month doing an order, now it's like every week I'm having to go get those same items and stuff. So yeah, I mean, same really. Trying to figure out how to make money stretch or how to get food recovery or something to supplement.
I would like to say that the problem that Jen has is also, it isn't something that we necessarily talked about in the study, but it is also, that is also a major challenge for us. Our community is a small community where families who are looking to purchase little sort of less costly they're going to Salmon Arm, and I never go to Salmon Arm that I don't see Sicamous families coming out of the No Frills and the Save On, and so. But when we have tried to access food from Salmon Arm grocery stores, like the food banks there can't even, there's two food bank programs. The Salvation Army is sort of the primary one, but there's one called Second Harvest, and they have too much food coming from the grocery stores. They can't even use all they're being offered, and yet we cannot access from. There are 6 grocery stores there, including a Walmart superstore, and we have asked and had no response to to the sort of challenges, even though we've had letters like back saying, yeah, we recognize that we see lots of people from Sicamous in our stores, but so that's also for us, that one grocery store in our town, people shopping in the nearest larger center but not being able to access any support from them, I think is fairly common for communities. I would say that any of the communities say around Kamloops, or that they would be having the same kind of challenge.
I was just going to add, my Wi-Fi is a bit messy here, but we work on a bit of a different model. We get a lot of great support from our local grocery stores. So we have stuck to the model of just ordering from the Save On and the Mark Creek and the local butchers, because that just seems to give us really good discounts and lots of other support. So we've kind of stayed away from ordering outside the community. So yeah, that's how we do things here.
Tom, you're based in Kimberley, correct?
We are, yes.
Yeah, coming from the Kimberley Food Bank.
Yeah. So it's different. It's great. It's quite fascinating listening to you guys talk, and you've done some amazing things for sure. This sounds like a great project. It's just kind of a little bit foreign to what we're doing. We haven't had, I guess, the discounts we're getting are pretty good, and they give us lots of other free food. So we've been very fortunate that way to not have to, at this point at least, go outside of that box. Yeah.
I wonder, yeah, Nick, that's perfect. I was just going to say, Nick, I wonder if you want to jump in. We have about 5-6 minutes left, and you were a part of this study steering committee, and we'll have like very broad insights into this and where it's going.
Yeah, I think I'll actually jump on to make a specific point, but I'll add a few kind of my little flavor with a few minutes we've got left here. One is that when we did meet up, and I think even prior to meeting up, it was almost like a values exercise, because a lot of it is like, okay, we could go to Walmart or some of these larger corporate entities to try to stretch the dollar, but like, is that what we value? And Tom, you're talking about buying local, supporting the local butcher, and they give you a great discount, which is good. It was always kind of that weighing of values. Is this something we want to lean into? And there were folks even out of the 4 food banks that some were like, no, we would really like to stick to local, stick to you know, grassroots type grocers, and others that were like, oh, just wherever the dollar would stretch further. That's kind of where we're at. So that was an interesting piece, I think, in all of this. One of the things that comes to mind for me, I think in this conversation, as I'm just hearing, especially the last 15, 20 minutes, is kind of where our member standards kind of fall into play, and maybe how they might be limiting, or what's the word I'm looking for? Essentially this. So the member standards, as it stands right now, there's like simply a paragraph. And if you're the member and serving an existing area, geographical area, serving clients from that area, that is the area that ultimately you can solicit donations from. So technically, and this is not me poo-pooing on these conversations, because I get the realities of rural food banks. And this is where I think it might be limiting, is for a rural food bank then to go into, like Jen, like you going into Vernon saying, hey, a lot of our residents are purchasing from your store. People who live in our community are coming in and doing their shopping, things like that. Is there any give back in that sense? So to go and solicit a donation like that technically would be outside of the bounds. But like you mentioned, Janet, and Salmon Arm, if some of these food banks are like, there's just so much to go around, I don't know, maybe they're the first funnel point, and finding some of that excess, finding some of its way to you guys. Happy to be a coordinator in that way. My point being is that I think maybe our member standards are a bit limiting. I think they were set up originally to be somewhat to help maintain good relationship amongst the members, that we're not kind of getting in everybody's spaces, and essentially the biggest person with the best fundraising team can come in and trounce everybody else outside of their area. So it was kind of set up that way, but I feel like there might need to be some more nuance to what that is. So that's kind of a piece that's coming up for me here. But yeah, I don't know actually what more to add that hasn't already been said, because I think there's been a lot of value here. But I don't know, maybe unless there's specific questions, I'll give the last 3 minutes to other questions or things that others want to say.
I just have a question about working with, because you mentioned you were working with like a community kitchen, one of you, that was doing meal prep, and just if you like, how that was working for you, and if there was like, do you have a written agreement, or is it just, what is it?
I think that was you, Hannah, there in Revelstoke, the commercial kitchen there that's tied to your space. Got you muted.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Just how your relationship with the community kitchen was working. Like, do you have a written agreement? Like, are they doing food recovery and then doing the food preparations? Is it your food recovery? Just there's if there's multiple organizations vying for the same food again, but you're asking them to provide food for you. Just kind of, how is that relationship set up?
Yeah, our so the community kitchen that we work with is like part of Community Connections, where we operate in the same building. It's not a separate organization at all. We kind of operate parallel. And at the beginning, I think we thought that we would have a lot of food recovery that we could send over to Austin's the kitchen manager, send over to him to process into foods to give out at the food bank. But as the amount of people we're serving grew, and then there was less budget to like give out food to people, I've ended up, clearing the shelves every single time. So there's not a lot of food recovery to send over to him. But he's found his own ways to like make us extra meals, and that's like whenever he has leftovers from, say, catering contracts that he makes up, or it's a social enterprise. So whenever he does catering, the money that he raises from that is then used to purchase food that he himself turns into food or prepped meals for our food bank. Yeah. So I don't think it really worked out the way that we had planned in terms of using the food recovery to make the meals, but I don't know, it's been really successful, and there is just a big need for caterers in this community. So that has been quite successful. Yeah. Sorry, I just gotten just a staff member had Teams me here.
It's 12 o'clock and I want to respect everyone's time and thank everyone so much for coming today. The Land Table team is happy to stay on if folks want to continue chatting and asking questions, and we invite anyone who wants to participate to do so, but no pressure. I'm going to share the contact information of the research team and the participating food banks here, so if you want to follow up, those are the emails to reach everyone at. And yeah, we just really wanted to thank everyone for coming today and sharing your experiences. I know it's a different flavor of a webinar than probably we're used to, but it's not very often we get to share perspectives and experiences like this. So big thank you to everyone, and we hope to see you all soon.